Well, thank you so much for having us today. So let me just, so the 6th District of Colorado is a 20% Hispanic district and growing. But there are other very significant, there's a very significant African immigrant group led by Koreans, very significant Asian immigrant community led by Ethiopians, very significant Asian immigrant group led by Koreans. And so that what I find in the Hispanic community, first of all, there are a lot of people that say that they're leaders in the Hispanic community. And they're, you know, the family's been here for multi-generations, they don't speak any Spanish, but it's kind of identity politics. And they get their information through the mainstream media. But that's not the Hispanic community of my district. It is primarily immigrant, primarily from Mexico, and second would be El Salvador, and then there's a lot of smaller populations represented from different countries outside of that. But they get their information through a very robust Hispanic media, very robust TV, Telemundo, well, Univision, Univision being dominant, Telemundo catching up. And radio. I'm working on doing a segment, a weekly segment on Hispanic talk radio, on Spanish language talk radio. That you know, which is La Pregunta de la Semana, the question of the week. You know, where I'll go on for a short segment and answer a question, but it focuses me on studying Spanish for that given issue. That better prepares me to do longer form interviews, entrevistas, and so. This community really does not get their information through the mainstream media, so it's so important to dedicate time to learn Spanish, to be able to go on. And they see it, even though most of them probably speak English, but Spanish is their first language. But it is a sign of respect for that community to make the attempt, and they really appreciate it. And then we've probably got on print media. We've got 5 Spanish language weeklies that overlap the congressional district. And so it's important to work those as well. But I think, and right now, my office is preparing to do, what I find that, you know, we do have a large undocumented population that are very concerned about immigration reform. There's no question about that. But they're very entrepreneurial. The American dream for them is having their own business. And so we're getting ready to do a big seminar in Spanish on starting your own business and partnering with the SBA, partnering with a lot of different organizations to be able to do it, but it will be in Spanish. And so I'm very excited about that. That's the first one that we'll be doing all in Spanish. And so just dedicated towards that community. But so it is, you know, really. The only other thing, what I do find in immigrant groups tend to be more religious, more faith-based than your average American. And so in all the immigrant groups, whether I go to the mosque, I go to a Hindu temple, I go to a Sikh temple, I go to Ethiopian evangelical Orthodox services, I mentioned the mosque. And then in the Hispanic community, there is a growing evangelical movement where there's a network of pastors that I can meet with and go to their respective churches, and that's very important too. So, but you know what they say, well over 90% of life is just being there, and I think that is just such a big thing. I mean, they think Republicans don't like them. So, and they register as Democrats. And so it's breaking that narrative by being in their community.
Easy? Well, let me start, whoa, this thing's on. Let me start where Mike left off. I think the biggest part of this is just showing up. When I was first elected to the state senate, I can remember very vividly, it was a big debate coming off of the floor. We went back we do our weekly lunches, and a young staffer came in and said, "Do you know what they're saying on Spanish TV?" and explained to the whole caucus, and I said, well, who's speaking out there for the Republican side of this? And there wasn't anybody. Not only wasn't there anybody, but there was no plan associated with it. I mean, the first part of this is just showing up, making sure that you've got a message out there that is your side of the message on issues. And then showing up in the district, making sure that, you know, as we're going into a campaign, and you're looking at precincts, you're going to walk, you always triage, well, let's go to the highest turnout precincts first. But if you're never talking to the lower turnout precincts, then you're missing a whole segment of the population that eventually will be the high turnout precincts. And so I think it's important to make sure that you're out there talking to all aspects of your community. And then outreach even further on, you know, everybody goes and talks to the chamber. Why not talk to the Hispanic chamber? Why not walk the businesses in the you know, more predominantly Hispanic part of the town? So it's really, I think first part of this is just showing up, showing that you care, and then having an ongoing outreach. You know, we do quite a bit on Spanish TV. We do a lot more on Spanish radio. Spanish radio I can advertise all year long, every year. It's cheap and people listen. And it's a good way to change the message based on what is happening here, what's happening on a national level, continue to change your message and let people know where you're at on the issues. You know, I also saw that early on in my political career, we would have swearing-in ceremonies where people would take citizenship, very proud time for an entire family to show up and witness a family member taking the oath to citizenship. And after each one of these, you would see the Democrat table lined up, voter registration, very out there, out front. And not only did we change that dynamic and make sure the Republicans were there too, but part of my frustration after redistricting was it was either in Fresno or Sacramento, both of which are about 2 hours from the center part of my district. And so family members wouldn't be able to take time off and go up. And so we started scheduling them twice a year in my district. And it is amazing, not only the support that the families receive at this, but the media that loves to go out there and talk about, you know, what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be an American. And our next one is coming up. We do it all every year around the 4th of July. It is a very, very proud moment of people becoming citizens for the first time of a country that they've lived in, and not just Hispanics, but a variety of, a lot of different countries. So it is truly, truly a melting pot of proud Americans and families. And so it gives us a real opportunity to welcome them for the first time, a very, very proud moment that we have twice a year, but a very good opportunity to reach out as well. I think it's also important as you're moving along to have third-party validators. It's one thing for Mike and I to talk about things, but if you're engaging the community and have other people talking about what you're working on as well, it helps you to get your message out there. And let me just finish on one last issue, and that is actually issue advocacy. Sometimes we tend to do things on a boilerplate and generically push things out. And I believe that most of the issues that Hispanics have in my community are issues that the overall community has. They're not single issue voters, but how you talk about those issues and the aspects of those issues are very, very different. We talk about some of the reforms that need to happen, and I talk to a lot of first-generation business owners, entrepreneurs, and ADA issues come out. It's a huge issue in California. It's a huge issue for all small businesses, but predominantly the businesses that get singled out are the ones that may have a language impediment, may not be, either English is not their first language, or they just may not be as familiar with the law. And so these lawyers will go out and target these small businesses and really try to extort money out of them, even putting them on payment plans to get them to settle and go away. So ADA lawsuits and regulatory reform ends up being a big deal, but ADA is where they feel like they've been singled out in California. Healthcare, how we talk about healthcare is a huge, huge issue. In my community, Medi-Cal, Medicaid is a very, very big issue. A lot of new people are getting added to insurance for the first time, but still have no access. They're still going to the emergency room. There are still undocumented parents that their kids can go to the hospital under S-chip, but they still don't have coverage. And so how we talk about healthcare ends up being a big issue, as well as immigration. I mean, obviously, how you talk about immigration, where your focus is, what your solutions are, and both Mike and I have been champions of leading the charge on full immigration reform in the House and really just pushing a real movement. But I would tell you the biggest issue in my district continues to be water. You take away our water, you take away our jobs, and jobs is always the #1 issue.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, I know you have another engagement, but do you have a couple seconds for some Q&A?
Absolutely.
Amy, you did a great job with your intros. You may now have the first or the last question.
I'll do the first.
Okay, set the tone.
For 20 points.
Yeah, right. I may have to phone a friend. You guys both did a great job of talking about how you're dealing with your constituents in your district. Talk a little bit about how you combat, frankly, some of the president's more xenophobic rhetoric in his conversation. Obviously, I think we all know that some of the policies don't mirror that, but how do you break through that with your constituents?
Well, I mean, that is, obviously for the Hispanic community, it's a particularly big issue. You know, I mean, if in Spanish language media, when the president, when the candidate Trump announced, his words, they just exploded on Spanish language media, extraordinarily negative. I think, quite frankly, it's where we differ from the president. I mean, with our community. And so, the first thing that I did in this Congress was introduce a bipartisan proposal in the House, in the Senate, before the president was ever sworn in. So it's myself and Luis Gutierrez in the House. It was Durbin and Graham in the Senate to take the executive order from the Obama administration on DACA and put it in permanent law, and to give certainty to those children. And so that sent us a very strong message to the Hispanic community that I was going to stand up for them, you know, irrespective of what this administration was going to do.
I would add to that, I think it's important that we're out there all the time. So regardless of the rhetoric that's out there, that we're out there, and they define us as individuals that are fighting for the issues, and they're very well aware of the issues that we're fighting on. Yeah, it was tough during this last election, some of the rhetoric that came out, but it's stuff that we've been dealing with all the time. The media, Main Street media, you know, they love to put out, you know, Steve King is always the Republican talking about immigration. This is nothing new for us to talk about. That is not our message. This is, you know, our immigration reform policies are not what somebody that has an extreme position has. And so it is twice as important for us to get out there and say what we're working on, what we believe in, what are our core principles, where do we agree with Democrats? You know, where can we come together as Americans? And, you know, I think there's no better proof of that than actually changing law, and we're going to do that this year. The Enlist Act, I would expect, will be the first immigration bill that gets taken up. It has one of the most highest co-authorships of any bill in the House. We're right at about 218 co-authors right now. Even some, I would say, some more extreme members are co-authors on the bill. So it's really creating a movement that will allow us to engage even when there is rhetoric that's out there.
And one quick note, one thing that I do with all the immigrant communities is I want their identification with me, quite frankly, not as a Republican, but as their congressman. And and so that is so important that they say. And when they do, you know, quite frankly, when I get into the campaign mode, I don't have joint event. You know, each community does their own event for me. I don't mix them in with the quite frankly, with the Republican Party. And so it's important that I have my own individual brand with me.
Scott Salmon.
I wanted to ask a little bit a different side of that question. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking about the English first movement, which seems to be on both sides of the aisle, and this notion that English ought to be the official, I hear it from time to time. I think it preceded President Trump, it preceded even some of the Freedom Caucus crowd, but do you get backlash at all because, hosting a business forum in Spanish only, do you get other constituencies that kind of look at that and say, well, I'm not sure I like that?
Sure, I mean, I do. No, there's some pushback. Not as much as you would think, but there is some pushback. There are people, that are very much opposed to my version of immigration reform. There are people that are simply anti-immigrant, and their vision of America. There's no question about that. But I've formed more of a coalition of support, quite frankly, that is beyond the Republican Party. In terms of also independent voters and some Democrats, and so that coalition gives me the kind of independence that I need to be able to withstand those kind of attacks.
And I think that it's important, especially through our schools, that everybody speaks English. If you're going to be successful, if you're going to enter a workforce and have a competitive advantage, you need to speak English. But regardless of where you immigrate from, you should never forget your roots or lose your. I mean, we should be speaking many different languages, and I certainly saw it firsthand from on my wife's side of the family. They had to speak English at home, except for Grandma never spoke English. But I mean, their mom and dad got mad at them if they didn't speak English at home. But they always watched Spanish TV. So I mean, it's where they got their news. But it was important that everybody was able to speak English to be able to get a job, to be able to be successful. So I think it's important to send that message. Yes, English is our primary language as a country. But we are a melting pot of people that have languages that we ought to be not only respect but supportive of. And I think our job as well is to make sure that we're outreaching to everybody. And so I do, we do our little, I can't remember what we call the pamphlet right now, but we have several different pamphlets in several different languages because I've got such a diverse district that we put out so that we can get more people engaged and involved. And we want to make sure that they've got the ability to read something in the language that they feel most comfortable with.
And I do believe, they do know the value of speaking English in terms of their own advancement. The one thing you see in Spanish language TV and media is lots of ads for, courses to learn English. So.
Bert Gomez,
Bert?
last
Yes.
question.
When you have town halls, do Latinos actually show up?
I would say certainly right now it is a different dynamic. Yes, Latinos always show up. I've done town halls in Spanish, and I think that has been more receptive, even though not all the questions were in Spanish. It gave people a comfort that they could do either one. But right now these town halls are a little different. It is a different time right now where it is less about the people that are, working hard in your district and just want to show up and get some information versus those that just want to show up as part of a political movement and see what they can catch you on camera saying.
Yeah, I would say that we're going to be doing another in-person town hall in August. But the last one, quite frankly, was not reflective of it was disproportionately white Anglo. And I think that it quite frankly, Bernie Sanders Democrats. And God bless them, and I needed to hear their concerns, but I don't think it was really representative of the district. And I haven't done town hall meetings specifically in Spanish, and that's probably something that at some point I need to do.
Gentlemen, we so thank you for being here. And I have one last question for both of you. You two are the champions for this outreach. Who else is number one, coming to you, and who else have you kind of deputized to help with this? I mean, there is a lot of folks out there that need to be asking the right questions. I mean, 8 terms from now, we're going to be in this situation, and folks are going to need some help. Who can they turn to, and who are some of the others?
Well, certainly the two of us team up very strongly together and author bills and co-author each other's bills, but we've got a great network, and I would say led by Mario Diaz-Balart. He's been a true champion on this for a long, long time. We, I think, all do different whip counts, and then we compare all of our different whip counts, which also gives us an opportunity to see who's really out there with us and where they're at on a variety of issues. Are they only willing to support the Enlist Act, or there are some members that I would have never thought would support the Enlist Act, and it was because they actually wanted to see comprehensive. So actually having those conversations, but Carlos Curbelo, Valadeo is very, very involved. We got a pretty big coalition. I would say on our overall whip team, there's about 20 of us that are pretty consistent, but then there's a much larger outreach.
And our House leadership is open to this.
Very.
Good.
And I would say even the president, on certain issues, we've had good discussions. The Enlist Act is something that he supports. So I think we're already having good discussions. The question is, how do you get it across the finish line? You know, if we're going to continue to see a greater push on border security and border funding, then what are all the other pieces that come along with that? And how do you tailor your messaging that, you know, the American public realizes that we're pushing for full reform? But we got a battle ahead of us. I think this is our opportunity to get immigration reform done, though.
As we get closer to 18 elections, we'd love to have you guys back. But with our thanks, new national parks book out for your constituents who are coming out to see you. And now we are going to say goodbye to you and invite our next panel up with Bert Gomez.
Thank you.
And thank you to Ripon once again for having Univision this morning here at the breakfast. And this is a great next panel on Hispanic outreach, and we continue the conversation. Thank you to Congressman Coffman and Congressman Denham for teeing up the conversation on Hispanic outreach, and we will introduce the next panelist at this moment. First panelist will be Stacey Daniels. She is press secretary for Congressman Blake Farnholt. Prior to becoming press secretary, Daniels served as a deputy communications director for Donald Trump's presidential campaign in Michigan. She also worked on statewide and local campaigns, including work as a communications director for a gubernatorial candidate. Prior to going into politics, Daniels was a reporter and anchor at KEZI, the local ABC affiliate in Eugene, Oregon. Although she got her start as a journalist, Daniels has always been a fan of politics. She spent her days at the University of Missouri, is that the way you say it? Missouri? Where she earned her bachelor's degree in journalism in 2012. Welcome, Stacey. Our next panelist is a top bilingual communications staffer on Capitol Hill, Daniel Buccelli. Currently serves as the communications director for Congressman Coffman. Prior to his current position, he worked at the House Republican Conference as their press secretary for specialty media. During this time with the GOP conference, he implemented a full comprehensive Hispanic media strategy to include members, Spanish coaching, press pitching, story placements, and was responsible for the 2016 State of the Union GOP Spanish response. Welcome, Daniel. And last but not least, the Honorable Chris Pena from Univision, my colleague, who is Senior Vice President of News for Local Media at Univision, the leading media company serving Hispanic America. I had to say that. Pena leads Univision's news efforts in enhancing collaboration between network news and local news operations. He implements local news editorial guidelines, serves as mentor for Univision's owned and operated local television station news directors, as well as liaison between them and Univision Network News and Marketing. Mr. Pena works with market general managers, news teams, and senior management across the company to ensure Univision continues to deliver the best in local news to the multicultural audience it serves. Welcome, Chris. So each of the panelists will have 3 minutes of opening remarks, and then we'll jump into Q&A. Stacey.
Thank you for having me here today. So I am the press secretary for Congressman Blake Farenthold, and he represents the 27th District of Texas. And our district is 49% Hispanics, and a lot of the Hispanic population in our district, they're actually very established Texans. A lot of them have been in the district, you know, they're 5th or 7th generation Texans. But only 38% of our voters in our district are Hispanic. So there is a pretty large population of non-Hispanic voters. And so our biggest way that we target these voters is just treating the Hispanic population like the rest of the voters in our district. We do have 2 Spanish-speaking staff members, and so if someone calls the office and they want to talk to someone in Spanish, they can do that as well. And one of the biggest things that we do is we actually tag and identify issues by age rather than ethnicity, because that's where we see that there are the biggest changes between younger voters and older voters. So for our media outreach methods for the younger Hispanic population, we see that they're getting their news from more non-traditional media outlets. So they're looking for social media. Facebook and Twitter is where they get most of their news. Univision, Fox, ABC, all of those normal media outlets aren't really reaching these voters, which is the same as mostly all millennials across the board. And then as far as the older generations, we see that they are getting their news from more traditional media outlets. So they are watching Univision, Fox, ABC, and even reading newspapers is a big one that the older generation does as well. And so in general, while an overwhelming number of the Hispanic population does watch traditional Hispanic television, they also watch the local affiliates in our district. So we do a lot of work with, you know, the local ABC, NBC affiliates, and we do reach out to Univision as well. So we send our press releases to those stations the same way, and the congressman does interviews with them as well. The biggest issue areas in our district that we see, the older Hispanic voters are interested in pro-life issues and family values. But with the younger generation, that's not quite what they're interested in. We see that they're worried about paying for college, and DACA is also a very big issue for these younger voters. But again, that's an issue that with millennial voters across the board, you see that that's an issue for them as well. And so my job is just to best communicate the congressman's messages, which are being pro-life. He's very big into border security and supporting our veterans. And actually, a large percentage of the veterans in our district are Hispanic. And so we just believe that the Hispanic community doesn't want to be treated any differently, so our message across the board is the same. We don't have a different answer to questions if a Hispanic voter is asking a question versus someone else. So that's what we do in our district.
Thank you, Stacey. Daniel?
Thank you very much. Yeah, exactly what Stacey just said, everyone. I work with Congressman Coffman as his communications director, and as he mentioned, we have a very diverse district. It's just the suburbs of Denver, so it's a very interesting crowd. The headquarters there is Aurora. So yeah, exactly what Stacey just mentioned. Keep the message the same, show up to their events, establish a relationship. I would say with Spanish media it's even more so, establishing a rapport with the reporters. They actually text me quite a few times a week, and it's not just reaching out to them when you want a story or when you want an interview, but just simply keep that line of communications open. Hey, nice story, last night's news. That they appreciate that we are watching them, and that it's a give and take relationship. Another thing is going out there and explaining to the community what services our office offers, and that can be done in both languages. Sometimes we get pushback, as the congressman mentioned, sometimes we don't. When we do, we explain to them that there are constituents and we're here to serve them the best we can. On social media, over the last, I would say, 6 months, we have seen a shift to where anytime we put anything out in Spanish, there's a little push. But I would say the majority, when we're out in the district, when we have the town halls, it's been supportive, establishing that independence, not so much just a GOP member, but rather my congressman. That's been a big help in our district. We're about a 23% Hispanic district, and it's something that's growing. And in my previous position here on the Hill with the conference, when I took over the role and introduced myself to all members, I was surprised to see that the majority of districts that contacted us back was not the usual Florida, Texas, or California offices, but rather the Midwest, because they're seeing a population change and it's happening quickly. You've gone over the statistics this morning, and it's simply not a matter of ideology anymore, it's a simple arithmetic. So do the math, and that's why we want to get ahead of that curve.
You know, before we go to Chris, I will say that for those of you that may not know, there are 136 House districts with Hispanic populations above 20%, which is huge. 136 House offices, which is amazing. Chris?
Well, I couldn't ask for a friendlier moderator, Bert, so we're going to take you everywhere. Always bring your own moderator. I want to thank the Ripon Society for this invitation to speak with all of you today and have this really important conversation. When the congressman was speaking, I was thinking about how I was one of those Latino immigrants who went through a citizenship ceremony, and they're absolutely right on. Right? There's not a prouder moment in one's life. When I came here from the Dominican Republic at the age of 7, 1981, we were coming off a census that showed a population of about 10 million Hispanics in the U.S. By the year 2010, we were at 50 million. And at this point, we're in the 54.5 million range and expected to grow to 130 million by the year 2050. That is just incredible growth, right? And that growth really tracks with the growth of Univision, which a little more than 60 years ago began with a single stick in San Antonio to serve the Hispanic, or what they call the Mexican Spanish-speaking population there, because before that there was nothing. And so Univision was the only game in town. Years later, I worked at Univision in Houston, and our station would get about an 80 shift of Spanish language audience. There was Univision, there was Telemundo, and there was very little else, but Univision was dominant. In 1981, when we got home from JFK Airport, we turned on the TV and watched Univision. So when I returned to the company last year, it was a homecoming again. Right? This is part of, I share the same connection that the U.S. Hispanic population shares with Univision. And that one stick has now grown to this incredible company, and there are a lot of, there's a fact sheet on your tables here. But we have, on the local media side, just on the local media side, we have 126 radio and TV stations. So I was really happy to hear the congressman speak about the power of radio, right? And radio is less expensive, and you can get a lot more bang for your buck there. TV is still a little more expensive. But we not only have a great amount of properties that are in local media with 57 TV stations and 69 radio stations, but the company overall has grown beyond that single stick. So I think we're up to 17 digital and broadcast properties, several cable networks. If you're into just watching novelas, we have that for you. If you just want news, we have a partnership in international news with Photo TV. And then we have Fusion, both on the digital and on the cable side, which is a property that really just hyper focuses on millennials. So, and then when it comes to millennials, while Latinos of an older generation, Spanish is their primary language, in adults 18 to 49, Univision wins in local news, right? So, and I'm not talking about in isolated areas. I'm talking about the top stations for local news at 6 and 11 p.m. In LA, it's KMEX. In New York, it's WXTV. Miami, we'll skip for a second. Houston, Dallas, and Chicago, where I worked for several years, the #1 local station for adults 18 to 49 for 5 p.m. news is WGBO. It's really incredible when you think about it, the overall reach of the company.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for the panelists? Yes.
Now, you mentioned there are 120 plus districts that have 20% or more.
136, yeah.
136. I guess my question is, how many of those are Republican, or just even a rough average? And then mostly for the two congressional staff, have you identified those offices and kind of given a best practices like you just outlined, for those offices? And how many of them are actually doing it, and who's kind of enforcing that? Is that an NRCC function? Is that a conference function? I'm just curious if you guys have a sense of that.
So I'll answer the first question. There's approximately of those 136, there's slightly over 50 of those that are Republican offices. And we do have obviously Univision visits all those offices, and we have a conversation with those offices all the time.
Right.
To make sure that they actually visit our stations, make sure that we have a local relationship with those offices from our GM standpoint, our station standpoint, radio and TV. Not just policy here in Washington, but make sure that they know that our stations are there in those markets.
Right.
So absolutely, we have a relationship with those out there. I think 58 or so of those are Republican offices.
So obviously Fairholt and Coffman have a plan. Do your other colleagues in those offices know about a plan and a template so that they can follow it?
Certainly, conference does have tools, whether it's members coaching, ultimately the ultimate enforcer is, the congressman and congresswoman. If they're interested in reaching out to that community, they can turn to conference, and we help them with everything with, sitting down with Spanish media, pitching them, booking them, op-eds in Spanish, members coaching. So those are the tools that are offered to them. But ultimately, it's each office, working with a Hispanic community in Florida. It's not the same as speaking to the Hispanic community in California and Texas. So it has to be localized, what works best for them. If you have a very rural district, radio might be best, more economical, further reach. If you have a very urban setting, obviously you have to target your message to that community. But yeah, and as far as the campaign side of it, the RNC has a team that handles that on the campaign side.
And yeah, as far as for our district, I think it's mainly just that, the congressman, over time, he's in his 4th term right now, so he's seen kind of how the Hispanic community, reacts to messaging and stuff like that. So that's why the messaging is specifically tailored that way.
And I'll just add on, the best way to get members to see is just show them the numbers. This is where we were this term, this is where you are this term, and the trend. Just go in there with hard numbers. I think that's the best thing a staffer can do.
Hey, Bert, what I was wondering, with those districts that you have identified, with these folks, in terms of voter registration and in terms of voter turnout, is it very similar to the rest of the demographics of the country? Is it higher, is it lower? Is it
We haven't gotten into that level of detail, Jim. We could, but we haven't.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. All right.
Any more questions? Yes, Victoria?
Hi, this question is for Chris. Chris, Mr. Coffman has done an incredible job learning Spanish to make sure that he's reaching out to his constituents. What if you work for a member who doesn't speak Spanish? Can you still access Univision?
Absolutely. I mean, the lack of the language skill, it should not be a barrier whatsoever. All of our people speak English. All of our reporters speak English. If you visit one of our newsrooms, sometimes what you'll see and what you'll experience is that everything happens in English until you get on air, until the anchors start speaking. So I don't think that should be an impediment at all. We welcome visits from members. In fact, Congressman Barton had a really nice visit with our station in Dallas, and hosted by Mark Maceball, our market leader there. He did an editorial board, and that's fantastic. So if that's something that any member wants to explore, that is always on the table. You can contact Bert, and we will facilitate that regardless of Spanish speaking.
I'm going to just tack onto that, and the time I had with conference and working with different members and Spanish news outlets across the country, I never had the problem to where, the message was misconstrued or bad translation didn't come up, because they know that, if that happens once, that door is shut and they'll never be back, but never had that problem.
Any additional questions?
Bert, I have one, and it's for you guys, especially in the House. Dealing with the overall attitudes in the House, with your colleagues who do have a significant Hispanic, do you guys have a caucus that you guys get together on a regular basis, whether it be communication directors or with your chief of staffs, since Bob is here, throw that Bob in. Do you guys find that is something that is starting to take place, or is it not?
With other offices?
With other offices, with other communication folks that are reaching out to you all, saying, what are some of the, again, working for two champions, you know, in this arena. Are other offices concerned? Are they looking at this? Are they looking at 18? Are they looking at 20 in terms of saying, guess what, this is going to be a significant problem to us?
I'm not sure what other offices are doing. We haven't had a lot of discussions with other offices. However, you know, all the communications directors from the House side for Republicans, they do meet once a week. So I'm sure that at some point we may talk about Hispanic outreach, but I think right now it's just office by office is what I've experienced.
Jabin, I know Jabin Castro's in the audience, but I will say, Jim, that there is a Hispanic conference in the House, led by, if I'm not mistaken, the Diaz-Balards, Curbelo, Ileana's part of that conference, Valadao, I think Jeff Denham's part of that conference. So there is a, you know, the Democrats have their caucus, the CHC, well, the Republicans in the House have their, it's called the Hispanic Conference. So there's, you know, Devin Nunes, I mean, there's several, 15 or 20 members are part of that.
And on the Senate side, I'm on the Senate side. Senator Hatch, back in 1987, started the task force on Hispanic affairs. I run that for him right now. And there's, you know, Republican senators joined the task force. There's a big group of us that are doing Hispanic outreach. Well, not outreach. I don't want to get the term confused, because we're not doing the role and responsibility of this task force that Senator Hatch has is to educate the Republican senators on issues that affect the Latino community. Now, also, I mean, this is specifically for Latinos, but right now I'm in talks with Senator Scott from South Carolina and Senator Rubio in doing a broader outreach to all minorities. So that's the next step that we're going to be doing. But right now, we do have a task force on Hispanic affairs on the Senate side.
Now that begs the question, what is the Latino population in Utah?
17%.
17%. 17%. Scott, Sam, and you, I think you had a question?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it, because I was going to ask about the Hispanic caucus, and I know it's kind of been a closed, from a party standpoint, it's been kind of a closed operation. Is it actually helpful to have, from a legislative standpoint, to have a Hispanic caucus as opposed, I mean, I'm kind of curious about that. I understand it for voter outreach and segmentation for how you go out and get the vote, but for legislation, is it actually helpful?
You know, as best as I can answer, again, I think Jabin could probably have a better answer than I do, but, you know, it used to be where Hispanic Republicans from the House, they were part of the original Congressional Hispanic Caucus. They were all united at one point, and some issues, particularly, may have been immigration, they have, you know, kind of divided the members, and so the Republicans from the House started the conference. But at one point, they were all united as part of one Hispanic caucus, many years ago. That obviously has changed since. Jay, you may want to add to that.
I'll leave it for the panel. Go ahead, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with you. There could be more that could be done in that regards. But again, it goes back to the messaging, whether it's, you know, there's not such thing as a Hispanic economy and Hispanic healthcare. No, it's an American economy. And so how do we integrate, you know, the messaging? Yeah, sure, you know, Hispanic, Latinos have different, you know, point of views or you know, what they're ideally would like to see done. But overall, it's just the communication aspect of it. And of course, we welcome more people working this together, whether it's individual office level or we do as a conference. There's a lot more that can be done.
To sort of maybe answer the question, but also just to kind of give some input for Stacy on that, chief of staff to a member from Texas, we see divisions within the Hispanic population, for instance, on issues like immigration. And it's almost an age division where those, as Stacy pointed out, who have been their 5th, 6th, 7th generation, they're as opposed to the immigration or the illegal immigration coming across the border that we see in Texas right now. They're some of the strongest proponents for a wall. that are imploring the congressman, what are you doing? So it's not just the quote right-wing Caucasian folks in our district are doing it. Now, the younger Hispanics, again, the more I say millennial, if you want to just try and do it, that they're completely the opposite. So you can't just say, we're going to have this Hispanic outreach, which I think is part of the division you saw with Republicans.
Right.
And so that's why we try and address issues. The congressman is for whatever Mr. Trump wants to do with the wall, and we don't tailor that message to any demographic. So we'll say that, and we find as much support from, I'd say, older Hispanics in our district as we get from anyone else in our district. And that goes back to your point. So if that helps anybody understand that.
Question in the back?
Yeah, could you talk about media coverage of issues like that, coverage, especially on the local level? You talk about local stations covering, I mean, you got, what, 30 minutes to work in President Trump. I mean, how do you fit a local congressman in there and their more nuanced views and what the dynamic is on that?
Sure, look, the goal is simple. The goal is to be accurate and to tell the story accurately. And you know, the Spanish-speaking community was clearly on one side of the issue around the wall. So we saw a lot of energy against a wall proposal. Saw a lot of fear, quite honestly, during and since the election. And for us, there's been a very fine line, because we have to report what's happening, but then also not alarm the community. And then the only way you can combat that is by being accurate. And that's really the role of a journalist. So, you know, Univision is as long as I'm in charge of local news, we're going to do things by the book on the local side. And we have excellent news directors there. We have news in 16 different markets, and we meet bi-weekly, and we're in constant communication, and everyone to a person knows that we have to tread very lightly around this story. You know, and I know that externally sometimes, you know, what people focus on is the opinion that someone may have that works for Univision. But if you look at our newscasts at the local level, they look just about any other general market newscast, just in a different language and just reaching a different audience. And that's, we really pride ourselves on that.
Any other questions? Any closing thoughts from the panelists?
Thank you for having us here today.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jim.
Very good.